The views and opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Natural Bridges Media or KSQD's staff, volunteers, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay. I'm your host, Len B.A. My guest today is Sally Lehrman. Sally Lehrman is an internationally recognized expert and speaker on building a more trustworthy press. She was named one of Media Shift's top 20 digital innovators in 2018 for her work founding and leading the Trust Project. Previously an award-winning reporter on medicine and science, her honors include a Peabody Award, DuPont Columbia, and the John S. Knight Fellowship, with bylines in Scientific American, Nature, Health, and the public radio documentary series The DNA Files, distributed by NPR, among others. Her co-edited volume, Reporting Inequality, Tools and Methods for Covering Race and Ethnicity, was published in 2019. An earlier book, News in a New America, argues for an inclusive U.S. news media. Sally Lehrman is affiliated with the UC Santa Cruz Center for Science and Justice as Science and Justice Professor. Sally Lehrman, welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here, Len.
Yeah, and thank you for taking time away from all your other work to talk about the Trust Project. Just to establish some context, why is journalistic integrity even an issue? And why is it especially important at this time?
Yeah, well, it's critical at this time, and I'm sure probably every one of your listeners is familiar with the problem where you might pick up a piece of news or you'll on your phone or listen to it or see a video and you're not really sure, what is this? It all looks very similar. Is it really journalism, or is it something that's designed to trick you in some way, trick you into maybe buying something, or maybe actually convincing you of a political point of view, and now we've even seen to incite you to violence. So that's why today, ever since really the onset of digital information, I think we started to see trust in news decline a bit, and a lot of it, not a bit, but a lot over time. And I think it's because initially news organizations were trying to compete with everyone else in the space and were kind of doing the worst things. So they were writing clickbait, sensational headlines, maybe were sacrificing ethics in order to compete, because the tech platforms were the distribution engine. Most people, even now, get their news through search, through social media. And when it all looks the same, it's hard to know whether you're really getting something that is built with thought, that's built with care and integrity, or if you're getting something else. And I just felt like we really need to shift that equation and give people the opportunity to make their own decisions. And so the reason why integrity is important, especially important now, is because as this trust has declined, we've seen misinformation flood in because it's hard to tell the difference. And also because people started losing confidence in traditional news sources and became more open to misinformation. Mm-hmm. So that's why I see integrity as being so crucial at this moment.
Yeah, and it's, complete honesty and transparency, accuracy in news is I would say not ever been a real thing, but trust in the news was much higher. I'm old enough to have been a legal adult during the time of the Vietnam War. And, we used to watch, Walter Cronkite on CBS and as kind of an icon of the very, trustworthy deliverer, mediator of news. But at the same time, I was seeing things and learning things that revealed that at best, they were leaving out important details, and at worst, very often reporting just flat out lies. Not necessarily that they knew were lies, but that they didn't bother to go behind the scenes to find out that their sources were lying to them. So what's different? I mean, social media has really made a big difference, I know, in terms of where people get their news. Is there anything else that's really changed that's making this a ripe time to try to address this issue?
Well, first of all, Len, I think you raised a really good point that journalism isn't perfect. It never has been. But the thing that's different about journalism, one of the things, is that reporters really focus on public service, like focus on serving the public good. And so that means doing your very best to report accurately, to report honestly on topics that you know the public needs to know and understand about. So you're always making decisions about what does the public need to know, what do I need to check and confirm, and how do I do that? It's founded on this commitment to the public and a commitment to checking the facts. And while, like you pointed out, it's not always perfect. There's times where, especially, I mean, it's historically where journalism let itself get misled. Overall, there's this push toward better accuracy, better integrity. And why is it especially important now? Because of several factors. One is that in this social media environment and search environment where you're getting news from all these different places, it doesn't feel or look necessarily any different. We as journalists have to step up and be or adhere to our highest values, let's say, and really step out and separate ourselves out from that. And then number two, and tell people about the underpinnings of true journalism and why and how it is different. And then secondly, there has arisen in today's environment anew, I'll say, because it's not something that has never happened before, but there's arisen a real effort, many efforts toward misinformation and deliberate disinformation and misinformation. Misinformation is just when people repeat information that's false because they don't know any better or haven't taken the time to really think it through. Disinformation is when it's been deliberately created and designed to convince people that certain things that are false will seem true.
Yeah, and I remember hearing reports that we ran here on KSQD from the Center for Investigative Journalism about how certain individuals worked to create an impression of voter fraud. And it was very interesting how, they could describe very specific situations where there was, somebody complaining about a procedure or a mistake that an elections clerk had made, something really, really minor. And instead of reporting it to the authorities who could then correct the problem, they brought in video crews to show it and make it look like it was a big deal. And that's an example of disinformation. I mean, it's a very deliberate effort to create an impression that they knew was false. And that's, the layers of that are amazingly complicated, and the sophistication of it seems to be growing. So you talked about, having, some criteria and some particular practices that make for trustworthy news. What is that?
Yeah, and I also realized while you were talking that there's a third really important reason why we should be concerned about news integrity now, and it's because we live in such a divided society, and and part of why we're divided is because we don't know enough about the things that we share, and we also are adhering to different philosophies or different even facts that support our point of view. And journalism is intended to bridge those divides. I mean, that's one of the services that we provide is not only go out and report the facts so that you can be sure that they are accurate and that we've done our due diligence to make sure that we know they're accurate, but also we aim to help different parts of society learn about one another, understand one another. So provide a forum for debate and discussion without journalists, stepping in and saying, well, you should think this or you should think that, but saying, let us provide you the information so that you can have this conversation. And now, I mean, it's such a critical time for that to be happening.
And so if we were to try to dive into that and define what makes it trustworthy, how would you define trustworthy news?
Yeah, and you were asking, like, what are these things that we use to define trustworthiness? So what I should say a little bit, I'll start with the what is trustworthy. I think it's a tricky question in a way, because trustworthy, when we use trustworthy, because it really is about the audience, the public, being willing to trust. So it's not like you have to trust us. You should trust this outlet or that outlet. It's these outlets should do these things in order to become trustworthy and earn your trust. Mm-hmm. And we continue, as I said, we're continuing to try to improve as news organizations. And so that means, and news organizations need to remember that and not just kind of rely on reputation, even really good past reputations, but always need to be changing and adjusting to the society around them. So we developed, well, as an organization, we are made up of news organizations around the world who have agreed to adhere to what we call the 8 trust indicators. And those indicators are what we use to define trustworthiness or integrity behind the news. And essentially, what they do for the public is help you know who and what is behind the news, and whether through those things, whether you can trust it. And they cut across, the simplest explanation is a news organization that is trustworthy adheres to just the basic principles of a responsible press. So again, kind of repeating some of those first things that I had mentioned, ensuring that they're providing truthful, verified news and information in context. You were talking about news that's being pulled out of context, and then it gives it a different meaning. But we provide a trustworthy news organization is going to provide context that gives it a truthful meaning. And then providing a forum for civil exchanges and greater understanding of various viewpoints and across multiple types of populations, multiple ideologies. Stories, information, and ideas that reflect diverse types of communities and their interests and views. So helping people understand their differences, why they're different from one another, and what they share. And then underpinning all that, truly upholding the public's interest. And that means holding the powerful accountable and shining a light in unexpected places. So that's kind of the overarching thing, way to think about trust. And in fact, those things that I was just telling you about, those principles were defined in 1947 by the Hutchins Commission. And I like to bring that up because in 47, we were in a time similar to ours when there was a lot of distrust in the news. There was a feeling that news was just trying to get attention, grab attention in order to either sway people to a political agenda or just to raise money. And so what happened was the editor-in-chief of Time magazine got together with a friend of his at a university and said, we really need to do something here because we're going to get regulated. And can you help us? Like, we're going to get shut down or regulated in some way as news organizations. And so they brought together a group of leaders in news and also academics and talked more to each other, not so much to the public. And then determined, this is what a socially responsible press should be doing. And so we use that. I mean, I think it's great that it's held up so well over these years, and it's still the fundamentals behind responsible press.
And that's the basis of these 8 trust indicators that you've
Well,
developed.
that's yeah. So the trust indicators emerge out of that, and what happened was, I think, I mean, in your introduction, you talked a little bit about my background. I was a journalist for many years, working on areas that I thought were so important to the public in terms of decision making, like science. Science is funded by the public by and large, and it has a huge effect on our daily living. So whether it be a vaccine or whether it be genetic testing, let's say, and how that affects our lives, all these things are really important for the public to have a voice in and to understand. So that was one of the main areas, or one of the ways that I thought about journalism. And I'm not alone that way. I think journalists really are idealists. Like, we believe in the public's right to know and the public's right to have a voice. And I also felt, because I believe that so strongly, I got involved in a lot of things that to try to uphold journalism's highest values and gather ourselves around these ideas. And so with the idea behind the Trust Project was, we were letting technology overtake journalism and undermining these highest values. And I thought, I talked to editors about it. I was led a round table in the Bay Area of leading executives in the digital space, like from what then was called At Home. It was a very early digital news site, CNET. San Jose Mercury News had a digital site. So we all came together trying to figure out, well, what do we do in this space? And how do we maintain journalistic ethics? And then 10 years later, when I had this professorship at Santa Clara University, it was like a 5-year endowed chair, I brought together that same group and others nationally. And what really shocked me is we were saying all the same things. And I thought, this is crazy. Like, why are we letting the digital, like, what are these companies overtake what journalism is really about? And can't we flip the picture? And can't we teach the technology companies and the public, and even journalists, let's say, what journalism with integrity looks like, so that the search engine can serve it up, the social media can serve it up, and we can too as journalists. And so the way the 8 trust indicators were created is, I realized we've been talking among ourselves for a long time. Let's talk to the public. And I adopted this user-centered design process that I learned while I was a fellow, or as an alum of the fellowship at Stanford. And we went out and talked to people about what they value in news and how do they decide whether to trust it. And then we brought senior news leaders together and invited them to look at the research and think together about, well, how do we marry what people are looking for when they decide how to trust news, whether it's valuable? How do we marry that with traditions in journalism that we know underpin integrity? And that's how the 8 trust indicators came about. And we started with 37. There were a whole bunch of them. And then we decided, well, we better narrow them down, because there's no news site or person that's going to read 37. And I can go into all 8 of them, but I wanted to I'll stop for a minute in case you don't want to hear all 8.
Well, yeah, let's do that. I'd like to go through them. And if you're just tuning in to Talk with the Bay, my guest is Sally Lehrman. She is the founder and leader of the Trust Project. The Trust Project's mission is to amplify journalism's commitment to transparency, accuracy, inclusion, and fairness so that the public can make informed news choices. So, among other things that the Trust Project has done, you mentioned that you're working directly with news organizations who are participating in this, but you said you had brought a group of people in journalism together when you were working at University of Santa Clara to create these to kind of establish some trust indicators. Is that right so far? And yeah, so I wanted to give you some space here to really flesh that out for us. What makes it What makes it trust?
Yeah, happy to do that. So yeah, I reconvened this group, and Santa Clara's Markle Center for Applied Ethics agreed to host these convenings that we did, and we also had help from news organizations. So we did one convening in London, and we did one in New York, one at Santa Clara, and various. I mean, actually, I say one in New York. I think we did three, and all together, kind of narrowing down and honing in on, well, what is it that we really need to communicate to the public, and what is it that people want? And so I'll go through the 8 of them and kind of explain what were people asking, and then how do the indicators respond to it. So the first thing that people always talked about in our interviews was, and these were interviews, by the way, it wasn't like a focus group or anything. We went and talked to people just like you're talking to me, and asked them, spent time with them, and looked at how they use news. And one of the things that people repeatedly said to us is, we understand journalists aim to be impartial, but everyone has an agenda. So just tell us your agenda. And so when I talked with journalists, yeah, we have an agenda, but it may not be what you think. The agenda is to serve the public interest. So how do we help people know that? And how do we maintain it for ourselves? And so that came to a trust indicator we call best practices. And what best practices does is it shows you the guardrails that journalists live by within a site, that, like their ethics, that keep our focus on public interest. So our ethics, conflict of interest policies, information about ownership, what is the barrier between ownership and the news product, and what happens if there is an error made, like how are corrections made. So all that's called best practices, and that's one trust indicator. And when I call it an indicator, and that was a term people at first didn't really understand, but I think people are understanding more. It's an indication of trustworthiness. So the best practices trust indicator is something that people can look for in a news site. Like, are they showing you their ethics policies? Are they making corrections? Are they disclosing their ownership? And all the sites that are participants in the Trust Project do that. But you can look for it elsewhere too. Journalist expertise is the second one, and that came from people saying, well, who is this person that I'm being asked to trust? But what's their expertise? What do they know about the topic? And then when you think about trust, it really is a relationship. Like, we trust people, and we trust institutions because we share their values. We know where they're coming from. We can kind of assume they'll be somewhat predictable or reliable. And so, of course, you want to know more about who this individual journalist is in this institution. So we have a trust indicator called journalist expertise. And it not only asks for like a byliner on air, like you, to say who you are, but it asks for more information about each individual that people were looking for, like what languages do they speak, because that helps us know whether they know our community, where do they live, what kind of things have they reported on in the past. So there's a bunch of what we call attributes for each trust indicator, and so you can look for that, like, is there a byline or not, then does that byline tell us more, or like on air, have they told us who the speaker is and where they come from and what their background or expertise is. Then type of work came out of people asking, what, like, when we hear things on air or we see it on paper, we're not sure if it's opinion or if it's news, like if it's actually reported news. And they even said, we're not sure journalists even know the difference. So we decided, well, we're going to do a type of work label. Every news story has to be labeled news, opinion, or some type of paid content or analysis. Mm-hmm. And there were definitions that our working group of all of our news partners developed. And so they explained what each of those things are. And we do them on broadcast as well, but of course it's a little harder on broadcast, but we're working with broadcast organizations to try to make it easier. Then it's not just on the website, but actually something that could be disclosed more clearly on air. I'll do a fourth, and then if you want to stop me. Then there's references, and methods. So that came out of people saying, how was the story built, and how do you know what you know, journalists? So people wanting to know, well, we're looking at this thing, we're looking at this object or hearing it, but we don't know the source really, other than you. Like we don't, and a much higher expectation of people of news being more direct and clear about how it was gathering information. And so we don't ask that for every news story, but for a site that, for a story that might be more controversial, or maybe there was an investigative work put into it, or in depth, let's say, maybe a complex science story. What about vaccines, or what about infectious disease, monkeypox, let's say, then the news organization should be providing not only clear attribution, but ways for you as a user to be able to go to that original source if you want and learn more. And so that's what we ask of our partners, and that's something that you can look for. Like, is it just some sort of vague thing like sources say or we heard? Or is it, this is the source, here's where they, their expertise, this is their institution they're part of. And then on our sites for these types of stories, you will actually see a link at the bottom of the story where you can click on it and go to the original document or go to the original site where they gathered it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of a standard model we often see in print journalism in particular, where it says, according to such and such a source from such and such an organization, this is something going on. And sometimes they'll do multiple such things, and, so-and-so from this other place added this information, so that they state that. And then we see that imitated in the way even disinformation is presented, where they'll say, according to such and such a news network, this happened. And if you go to that other news network, there's no attribution whatsoever, and they could be making it up altogether, but at least it gave somebody a secondary source to quote. So it's a very, we're so used to hearing that style of presentation that it's easy to fake if you don't know how to look beyond it. So I guess, my question is how can people, regular users of news get in the habit of catching those kinds of things and being able to discern something that's really legitimate from something that may not be?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And it, in a way, like as you're talking, I feel sad that people actually have to do that we can't just listen to something and when there's an attribution, like feel that it's correct. But it's true, like we do all have to be alert to what we're seeing and hearing. And that's why these trust indicators, I think, can be really useful ways. That it's like a framework that you can think about. And your example is a really good one. So and by the way, like one of the local news organizations that's participating is the San Jose Mercury News. And so on an investigative story, you should see not just an attribution or a link within the story, but attribution at the end, like real references. And it's not on every story. It's still kind of uncommon, but it will be there. And you'll see the labels that I'm talking about. So one way to tell is just how transparent is this news site. And in terms of the actual attribution, well, does it sound like a good attribution? Maybe thinking about spot checks, like you said, going in and looking at, well, what is this organization or individual that they're quoting? Does it seem fishy to me? I think we need to all develop our radars a little bit. And if you've ever, well, let's say anytime you've had someone that you're responsible for, whether as a boss or you have children, other family members that you're responsible for, like you're not sitting there watching them the whole time. So it doesn't mean like you have to check everything that everybody does or every news story, but think about what you do, probably spot checks. Like I'm going to look in on this person now and then, just make sure that they're okay, or that they're doing the work I asked them to do and they're doing it right. And that may be what the kind of habits we need to develop around journalism. And then over time, of course, you start to develop a your own set of organizations that you rely on, and where you don't have to be quite as careful. And that's something I would recommend too, is don't rely on your social media new feed or your phone news feed for your news. I mean, I look at mine every day just because I feel like I want to know what it's putting out there. And then, of course, it becomes habitual. And I'm shocked because it's always like I mean, if I were to rely on my news feed, it happens to be Google, but I think Apple would be the same. You'd think there's nothing but tragedy going on around the world. There's fires, killings, arrests. It's like our local paper is the Half Moon Bay Review in Pescadero Pebble, which I subscribe to. And the Half Moon Bay Police Plotter is just like my Google News feed. You know, people being arrested for this and that. But you read the whole paper and you get a much more diverse and well-rounded point of view. So number one is like, don't rely on those feeds because you're going to get a distorted point of view. Number two is don't rely. Sure, you can listen to your friends and share news, but that's the stuff to be extra careful about because you don't know whether friends or family or the people who are just sort of landing in your social media have done the kind of careful news aware or don't have the news awareness that you do. And then the third thing would be start to develop organizations that you rely on and build that relationship. So in your local, I mean, even your own station, this programming, if people are unhappy with it, like they're trusting you, they're listening right now. But if they were to hear something, maybe they think I'm say something that's wrong, then I'm sure that they feel like they can speak up and tell you that, and you invite that. News organizations, this actually is a trust indicator called actionable feedback. And that's part of, I see, the public's responsibility in all of this is to speak up when you see things that are incorrect. So San Jose Mercury News and the Monterey Herald, I mean, they're doing their best job, but they're not always doing it perfectly. So you can hold them accountable, and they should, as responsible organizations, expect that and welcome that. I mean, as long as it's thoughtful.
Right. And you see in newspapers, you often see letters to the editor saying, you know, this article you published is incomplete or misses the point, or this editorial you published is in really bad taste and you shouldn't print it at all, or is so completely devoid of fact that it's, you see those kind of comments. But I think what you're talking about is even more simply calling news media outlets and even individual journalists to task when they get something wrong, or they've maybe not looked into something as far as they might have.
And one of the things that I wanted to raise too is it's not just negative things. Like a lot of times we think, well, it's our job to call, and we get angry. If we see, I'm the same way. I'll read something or hear and like, that's wrong. And journalists need to hear that, but they also need to hear when you have a great idea. And this is probably even more valuable when you can say, I didn't like the way you covered that. I felt like you left out this whole community. Maybe here's a story you could do that I'd really love to hear about or see, and even possibly suggesting sources. So thinking about yourselves as a partner in news distribution and news gathering, that's really an ideal relationship that one could build with your trusted news sources.
Yeah, that's great. We're going to take a really short break. We'll be right back with Sally Lehrman after this. If you're just tuning in, my guest is Sally Lehrman. She is the founder and leader of the Trust Project, whose mission is to amplify journalism's commitment to transparency, accuracy, inclusion, and fairness so that the public can make informed news choices. And Sally, we've been talking a little bit about the trust indicators that have been established through the Trust Project, and that you're working with news organizations to incorporate into their standard practices. And I know we haven't gone through every single one of them, but I just want to point out for our listeners that at your website, which is thetrustproject.org, correct? Thetrustproject.org, those 8 trust indicators are right there. And if you are curious to know more about this, or if you're even in the work of making news, reporting news, you might be interested in getting further involved. I wanted to ask you just a little about the Trust Project, who's behind it, and how's it funded?
Oh, great. Yeah. And that's such an important question, and one that everyone should be asking about their news, in fact. So who's behind it? I will say just myself and the staff that I've built up. We're a very small organization, but growing. And the other who is all the news organizations that are part of the Trust Project. We have more than 260 news organizations of pretty much every shape and size, so big that are part of the Trust Project. So, and they're in countries around the world. So we have 6 countries in Europe, and we have like BBC there. We have the biggest financial newspaper in Italy. We have trying to think of some smaller ones, and then in Latin America, we have 4 countries represented, and we have Puerto Rico coming in for the U.S. In that region. We have Canada. We were covered in every province in Canada, and then many, many sites in the United States.
Wow.
So we just invited today, we started a group of about 20 sites that are going to be joining us. And as part of what we do, I tell them in our kickoff call, these are the 8 trust indicators. And as we work with you, we will learn more about how the news industry is growing and changing and how we might need to adjust these. Now, what you're really asking, and of course, this is the key question, is how are we funded? And we're a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, independent from any institution. We are funded, and I try to, being a former business reporter, I try to make sure we have some diversity in funding. So we have a foundation funding, which is coming right now from the Democracy Fund, but we've also had Knight Foundation Fund. The Markle family funded us in our very first years. Trying to think if I'm leaving anyone out. We also have corporate funding. So right now we're getting funding from Google. We're also getting some funding from Microsoft for a news literacy campaign. We used to get funding from Facebook. We aren't right now. And then individual donors, our most important, and actually our original donor that helped us get started as the Trust Project was Craig Newmark and Craig Newmark Philanthropies. So those are the 3 areas. And since we've become a 501c3, I haven't done this yet, but what I want to do is make our website set up so that individuals can donate too. So it really kind of helps us, again, go back to that our original purpose, which is building this stronger relationship with the public and giving the public a voice in helping us know what's trustworthy in news.
So how would we know? I mean, obviously, a lot of news organizations are now involved, and I don't know if I'm using the term properly, affiliated with the Trust Project. How does the Trust Project combat misinformation and help those organizations, establish that they're more trustworthy?
Yeah, well, I always tell the news organizations, it's not like we're attesting, like we don't check every news story and make sure that it's correct. And we also don't review them. And, I should have mentioned broadcast since we're talking broadcast. So we also have Hearst Television, Tegna, many of their stations, and CTV News and CBC. But anyway, what our news organizations do, they apply to become a news partner, and that we call it news partner because news organizations don't like to be members of things. They were kind of a little bit skeptical at first, but anyway, we call them our partners, and that stuck. And they apply, and we do a very careful review. And we've had some that we've rejected because they are more than one were hyper partisan, or we had one that was everything they wrote or it was a newspaper, was very religiously what should I say, not tainted, but it was infused with a religious perspective. So like coverage of birth control or contraception was, it wasn't even contraception, it was about in vitro fertilization, was single-sided. So I had to say, like, either you're going to call that opinion or you can't be part of the Trust Project. So they declined to be part of us. But, and that's fine. Like, that's a type of news that people want, but that's not what we, that's not true journalism. So they have to apply, they go through a review process, then they become part of an incoming cohort. We're at phase 7 now with the cohorts. And then we take them through a process where they learn the 8 trust indicators and they implement them on their pages. So we say, like, have you explained how you get your funding? And have you explained, like for a nonprofit, even to your funders, how they don't have authority over your news? Like they can't tell you at KSQD what you can say on air. And so we're very careful about that and help them know that. And then another one that we asked them to do all of these 8 trust indicators and be more transparent about everything. And they have discussions together about the meaning. And so as a result, it lifts up the quality of journalism overall. So one example would be corrections. So especially in Europe, they said, we don't do corrections in Italy. Like, we just don't do that. And we had to say, well, would you rethink that? And then they started doing it, and they realized how important it was to build trust. And then in broadcast, actually, that was far less common than in print. Some news sites felt it was opening themselves up to criticism and attack, that if they print a correction, that people lose trust, not gain trust. But in fact, just like in a relationship, if you admit your mistake and say, I'm going to fix it, that builds trust, as opposed to hiding and, lying about it or just pretending like it never happened.
Right. Yeah. Comes down to the transparency issue, that without the transparency, you don't know, because if you have an expectation that something is going to be perfect, you're going to be led down the fairy tale path there. So, yeah.
That's right. And in fact, we did have some of our reviewers, so when they're looking at a site, and it's all news partners that review each other, so it's peer review. And they'll say, like, I'm not so sure about this site because I don't see any corrections. And we'll ask the site, and they'll say, oh, well, we never make mistakes. And we're like, really? Maybe. So sometimes with actually broadcast, again, there were times that we had to admit, well, maybe you haven't made a mistake. But in general, that's a red flag. Yeah. If a site doesn't ever run corrections or you never hear them on air. And then just to finish that out, then they put these trust indicators on their pages. We encourage them to do outreach. We do outreach. And we just continue to work with them as best we can and check compliance over time.
Great.
Oh, and one more thing I should say, like, you'll see a trust mark. We call it the trust mark, and it's a T. It's the T logo in a black box. So a black T logo in a black box outline, I should say. And you see that on our partner sites. On air, you can't see it, so we ask that they put it on the website, or they will announce it. So we've got a station up in Seattle that's coming in, and they're figuring out ways to announce it. And the Public News Service, which is a news service that's, I think, provides news to almost every state in the U.S., they announce it. So at the end of their little quick news report, they'll say, we are a public news service, look for the 8 trust indicators, and then they give a quick URL so that people can go to their website and find the trust indicators.
Interesting. So at this point, I hadn't heard of the Trust Project until I heard of you. Do you anticipate, as you look into the future, that people will begin to identify a partnership with this Trust Project as a good thing, or something where they begin to assess the news sources that they're looking at in that context?
You mean would the public will start to feel that way as opposed to
Yeah.
news organizations? Yeah, yeah, I do. So I was telling someone this morning, like when I first started the Trust Project, I was really thinking about the supply side, if you will. I was really thinking about news organizations and how do we bring them to be more transparent and work with more integrity and help the tech platforms do a better job serving it up. And I didn't really think about the trust indicators in the way that we've been talking about them, which is also as a news literacy framework. So a way to assess the news
Hmm.
outside. I mean, I was thinking internally. So now we're doing more work to make the public aware of the trust indicators and of that trust mark. And honestly, I don't think we've done that great of a job. We try to do a big campaign every time we launch a bunch of sites, and we do it in social media. But now I hope you'll hear more about us because we just hired a marketing firm, in fact, public relations, who's going to be helping us with that. And we have some things in the works that I hope will just help people know more about these 8 trust indicators and how they're useful um, in so many ways as a way to assess the news. And if you just want a quick glance and you want to know, okay, the site is one I can trust, then you look for that trust mark. And the other thing that has happened over the years is um, teachers and librarians have really glommed onto this. And so the librarians at Santa Clara, before I finished my position there, they developed a curriculum around the trust indicators for undergrads, and that's
Hmm.
being used in various places. And the Economist Educational Foundation is doing that. And oh, and the librarians, you might see, well, probably not in Monterey, but we're doing a little a pilot where the librarians designed a bookmark that all it does is focus on that type of work trust indicator. And it has the different definitions
Hmm.
for news, analysis, opinion, and paid content. And on the back, it lists the 8 trust indicators. Because the librarians, they wanted something where they could help people understand those differences without like forcing it on them. So you can just pick up the bookmark, it'll have it there, and you'll have it with you. And we're going to put it on our website so that anybody could just download that and use it on their own.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Are there any
Kind of
educational
fun.
materials that are designed for public school grades?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to the news literacy. Of course, I try to give a shout out, and I don't remember the whole name, but it's a news literacy program, and it's just great. And they do work in grade schools throughout the country, and there's other ones like that. So what we will probably do, or what we've been wanting to do, is to partner with them and provide some of our just provide these trust indicators to them.
Hmm.
Um, and there's another one up in Seattle. So I guess the answer is no, there aren't anything on our page. There isn't anything on our pages. We should probably link out to those organizations. We do have a resource page
Hmm.
that provides materials for teachers and for, of course, news organizations. Um, and then you can download the trust indicators. You can look at our user research.
Yeah, and I've seen
All right there.
some really great content from media literacy um, organizations that's
Hmm.
probably right in
Yeah.
alignment with
Hmm.
this. But what you've done seems unique, and that you're really working with the news organizations themselves, and they're becoming partners. So can and you've mentioned a little bit about your criteria for when a news organization can become a partner, and it not everybody
Hmm.
passes the test, so to speak.
Right.
But can
Yeah.
all any kind of news organization join, and is there a cost involved?
Well, organizations, we really try to diversify the type of organizations that participate because we do feel there is an important benefit, not just for the public, to build trust with the public, but also through these search engines and other ways. And so we consciously make sure it's not just the big ones. The Washington Post is a partner too, but we have the regionals like the Mercury News, or we have digital natives. That's all they do is publish online. we have broadcast. So any news organization, as long as they're committed to those principles and really do practice independent journalism, they can participate. We do draw the line at like an organization that's just, I mean, I call it an organization, but it's maybe a sincere journalist who has their own blog. Like that right now would not qualify. It would have to be an organization that has at least a few reporters, but it can be a few. We have, trying to think of the smallest one, but we had some pretty small ones come in. And it comes down to like serving your community with journalism that is reported with diverse perspectives across multiple stakes in a story. Like when you think about when you're teaching journalism, you think about well, you have to think about everybody who either is involved or affected, or maybe initiated this activity or issue or action. And so they need to be thinking that way. They also need to be thinking about diverse voices within the community participating. Mm-hmm. So there's certain standards we have. I would say the other one is if you're a news aggregator, let's say all you do is gather news from other places, which again is useful, then they wouldn't qualify. So they need to be doing their own reporting because that's what we're trying to support here.
Right. Yeah. You're going after the actual source of the stories in this case.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So this is important work to, try to create practices within journalism where they can really re-earn the trust of those who are looking at their news. And we have just a few minutes left. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell listeners, well, one, how to find out more about the Trust Project, and also just to talk about a little bit more about your mission and where you're going and in the coming, where is the future? Where do you see yourselves in the future, and how do you hope that you can contribute to a changing landscape and creating better journalistic integrity?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't let you finish. Thank you for that. The place you can find out about us, you already heard from Len, is just thetrustproject.org. So if you type in thetrustproject.org, you'll find us. You have to put the in front or you won't find us. So please remember that. We weren't the first, I guess, to grab that URL. Now, so our mission is to build a more trusted and trustworthy press, more trusted and trustworthy. And so you can see how all these practices sort of come together to build a stronger relationship between news and the public that we try to serve, or journalism and the public we try to serve. And we want to reclaim the role of journalism, of the press, as being this guide to accurate information, to issues that matter to the public, and to a place where you can have dialogue and feel that you can share with one another and learn with one another. Be that space, that civic space that journalism aims to be, or that news should be. And I know that we're in really difficult times, and it can be disheartening to read the news, and we found, or listen to the news, and we did some recent research, and we found that people really are, one, feeling anxious about what's in the news. I mean, of course, it's like discouraging, and then feeling anxious about being part of the problem by accidentally sharing news that's false or being tricked or fooled. And so we want to change that equation and give people the confidence so that your listeners can be confident that they're making decisions about what news to trust that are solid and that connect with their own values. So that's why there's 8 trust indicators, not just one. It's not just like trust this or don't. There's 8 because you all have slightly different things that matter to you. And we want to, kind of help build this more confidence on the part of the public, and also build a more responsive press so that there is this relationship that really journalism is founded upon, that true and accurate and honest journalism is founded upon.
That's great. Well, Sally Lehrman, I really want to thank you for being on Talk of the Bay And thank you for your incredibly valuable work. We need more than ever to be able to get accurate information about the world, and you're helping to further that along, and in a unique way. So thank you again for being here and for what you're working towards.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, Len. It's just, a lot of fun to talk about, and especially, and with you and your audience, like, as I said, I think everyone's got an important role to play here.
Great. Well, thank you again.
Thanks.